CSS3 lets us do cool things with colors, and I want to show you that here. Create a new file called colors.html and add your title there. Make sure you copy that basic structure from your box.html because we want to grab that normalize and your custom style sheet. We're going to be using the same style sheet. Your Internet Explorer conditional comment. Give the body the ID of colors so we can select it specifically. Add a container ID. And then just a level 1 heading just for fun. Okay, so in your CSS, your style.css, add a new section here called colors. Select your body with the ID of colors. And I want to show you here, this is where we're going to jump right into colors. Basically, what you can do in CSS3, instead of just selecting a plain old color like, let's just say navy or blue, you can add, or say like a hex code like 47D83E. I just made that one up. Instead of just selecting that, you can use RGBA colors and HSLA, which basically is red, green, blue, alpha, and hue, saturation, lightness, alpha. Now, RGB, you can use RGB in plain old CSS, so just RGB, and then you could say something like, oh, I'm just making up colors here. And then you get that color. But in CSS3, you can add an extra, append an extra part to the value here, and that is the alpha channel, which basically means you need to add a fourth value here in your RGBA within the parentheses, which is the alpha. Alpha means how transparent, the opacity. So 1 is equal to 100%, so it's fully visible. It's not see-through, transparent in any way. And 0 would be fully transparent. So in between there, you just use between 0 and 1, which you just use a decimal. So this is 40%, this is 60%, 80%, 99%, and basically this is just the alpha channel, how transparent the color is, which is really cool because I'll show you just in a second here. So I'm going to use this specific color right here. It's kind of a dark blue. So RGBA 25, 52, 84, and then 1, which basically means it is not transparent at all. It's a solid color. And I could have just done this, but I just want to show you with the alpha channel. Now in your selectors here, select colors and then container. That's going to select the container that we added. Width of 600, margin 0, auto to center it. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it the background, instead of just white, I'm going to make it be RGBA, and then 255, 255, 255. This is white, and then 0.5, which is 50%. And now if I give some padding to this container, let's go with 40 pixels. And just as a little throwback to the previous lecture, box sizing, I'm going to say border box just to keep it be the 600 pixels I set. Now you can see we have a transparent white box here, and you could change the alpha channel. So this is a little less transparent, and this would be very transparent. As you can see, it's very subtle. I'm going to remove that little border there. There you go. You can see, and so it's kind of neat because you can actually play with transparency now. And so if you were to have a background image behind here, you'd actually see the image through this transparent box. And you can also use HSLA, which is hue, saturation, lightness, alpha. I don't really use that, but if you are a designer and you know all about those specific values and that you want that sort of color, you can do that. And it would look something like this. And so that gets you like, so 120, 100%, 50%. So this is hue, saturation, lightness, and then the alpha. And that gets you kind of like a green color. And you could change the alpha channel here if you want to be more or less transparent. And that's how the HSLA works. But I usually use RGBA if I'm doing that, just out of personal preference. And now another cool part is gradients. This is a really cool part in CSS3 because before you'd have to use Photoshop, create a gradient, slice it up, use it as a background image, and again, very tedious process. But in CSS3, you can just add a gradient, and a very basic gradient would look like this. Let's just add a box in here again so you can see div, and I'm just going to give, I'm going to say this is a box with a gradient. And I'm going to give this the ID of box because we already have some styles set up. And we're just going to override some of those down here. Let's say colors and then box. So we're being very specific here. So we select the box in the colors. And then we're going to go, this is where we'll do the gradient. And a gradient would look like this in a very simple form. And so this is the very basic syntax here. We'll say background because it is going to be a background color technically. Linear gradient. And in parentheses, you choose your colors. So let's say yellow and then green. And so this is a linear gradient from top to bottom, yellow, green. And you could change those colors. It could be blue, green, or it could be blue, yellow, and so on and so forth. And you could see the gradient over here. Now, if you wanted the gradient to be left to right, you simply just need to add another value in here because it's also a linear gradient. You just say to right, and the linear gradient would go from left to right. Or you could change that and say to left, and it will do the opposite. So the default linear gradient is top to bottom. Now, if you wanted it to be bottom to top, you would say to top, and you could technically say to bottom, but there's already the default value, so you don't actually need to specify that. Another value you can add is to bottom right, and that would give you an angle. You could also do any other corner, so you could do to bottom left, or you could do to top left and to top right. And that will get you a gradient in all of the different angles. Now, if you wanted to do something a little more specific rather than just top right, bottom left, so on and so forth, you can actually do an actual degree angle. So 180 degrees will get you 180. If you want to do something specific like 120, or if you want to do, let's say, 73, you could see here, let me even just be more specific. Let's say black and white. And you can kind of see this a little bit easier here. Let's do a 40 or 35 degree. And you could see the angle changing as I change this value. And so that's kind of how you can angle these different gradients. You can also do a radial gradient. So let me just comment this out. A radial gradient gets you basically, background. And we could do radial gradient. And that will give you the ability to do a gradient based around a circle. So let's do blue and green. Actually, let's do blue and yellow. So you can see it's a circle. It's a radial gradient. You can also do multiple color stops in this and all the other gradients. So you could do blue, yellow, black, and white. And you could see it adds multiple colors in the... you can add as many as you want here to have kind of a very crazy looking gradient. Obviously, this is kind of ugly, but if you're doing something specific, let's say green, yellow, and blue, something like that, you could do that. You could do that. And so basically you can add a bunch of different styles in the gradient, whether it's linear, radial, and there are a lot of different values you can add. You can have multiple repeating gradients. You can have transparent gradients using the RGBA that we talked about previously. And there are lots of different things that you could do. And instead of just covering every single possible variation of gradients, which would be a little overkill in this lecture, it's a bit more fun if I point you in the right direction just to see all the different options you could play around with, and then you could just try it out. Just try it out here in this CSS file, and I'll head you in the right direction. So simply just go to w3schools.com/css/css3 gradients.asp. I'll also link it in the resources section of this lecture, and you could check out all the different things you could do with CSS3 gradients, and it's really, really cool. Lots of stuff you could do.